Hello, and welcome to my very first episode of my brand new podcast called Beyond the Pain, Heart and Home Healing. I have so much in my heart that I want to share with you all about grief and loss and pain and hope, joy and healing. And this is just the beginning of it. If you're listening to this, it's probably because you heard a brief little snippet of my story and maybe wanted to hear more. And I just want you to know that my number one goal for this podcast is, yes, to share my story with you, but more than that, I want to restore your hope. My only intentions here are to help you and hopefully help walk you through whatever difficult journey you're on and ultimately help you find hope and life beyond your pain in your heart, of course, but also in your home. And after my life was flipped upside down in more ways than one, as I was coming out of this fire, I looked at God and I said, listen, if we're going to go through this, like if I'm forced to go through this, I have to take this terrible pain that I now know and use it for good somehow. And that is exactly why I started my Instagram page. And that's how I grew a following to begin with, which if you're not already following me, you should follow me, by the way. But that's why I started connecting with other women who have similar stories. And that's why I'm here today making this podcast, all to help you, to encourage you if you have a similar story to mine, or even if it's not necessarily similar, but you've dealt with grief, loss, trauma, anxiety, or pain of any sorts. My goal is to show you that there is hope and joy beyond this deep pain, and that healing your heart and your home truly is possible after this kind of devastation. So for this first podcast, I simply want to just share my story with you. Like I said, there's so much I have learned and I want to share it all, but starting with my story will really give you a good foundation of how I got to where I am today. So growing up, I had one biological sister and one biological brother. My parents were happily married. I would say I had a pretty easy childhood. Nobody ever suffered any major illnesses or crazy tragic events or anything like that. Church was basically my second home, especially when I was old enough to actually, volunteer and serve in any capacity. I was the youngest out of all three of us. So even when my older brother and sister were old enough to be in the youth group and I wasn't, I always tagged along with them because I just loved being there and always had tight relationships with my siblings. And they were always super good to me. And so around the age of 12 or so, my family opened up our home to a few of my sister's friends who came from a really rough home life. And we always had people and friends and teenagers from the youth group in and out of our house, sleeping over, hanging out constantly. But there were three people in particular that we all hung out with so much, and they had such a rough life at home that they ended up moving in with us and literally became a part of our family. We lived in a 1,200 square foot house, already had 5 of us living in there, and made room for 3 more full-grown teenagers, but none of us blinked an eye at that. It felt normal. It felt like, well, of course we would do this for them. Not once did we think oh, this is going to be so crammed now, I'm sure my parents did, but, and it sparked something deep inside of me and gave me this huge passion for wanting to create that same thing one day for my future family because I loved it. And so, I've always wanted to get married, have my own kids, open up our home to other kids who may need a place to call home. And that became my dream for my life. And our family continued to grow over the years as my brother got married and his wife and her sister became a huge part of our family. And then my sisters and I started dating our current husbands who we knew from church and got married. And over time, we sort of just built this beautifully meshed family from all different parts of not only life, but literally the country. And that unit of people, blood and not blood, are the people I call my immediate family today. We go on vacations together. They're the people I have Christmas morning with, our children, our cousins. It's absolutely beautiful. And on top of this family we had created, we also had lots of close friends and small groups of people at church we saw and gathered with often for various reasons. And through the years, as everyone was growing up, getting older, getting married, we entered into the season of having children. And my husband's family had already started having kids when we started dating. So we already had a niece and nephew for a while by the time we got married. And we were even thinking about having our own kids. So on my side of the family, it started with my brother about probably 11 years ago. And he was the first person to have a kid. They got the ball rolling and then everyone started having their own kids. Now, my husband and I got married in 2014, and we decided that we were going to wait about 3 years before we even started trying to have our own kids. And I believe that's about how long we waited. Both my mom and my biological sister had no issues getting pregnant with their first kid, and being completely naive to anything regarding getting pregnant, staying pregnant, having kids, I assumed, hey, I'll probably get pregnant right away too. Well, unfortunately, that was very much not the case for me. I was told, and I was also very much under the impression that no doctor would ever even talk to you about infertility or treatments or anything like that until you tried getting pregnant on your own for at least a solid year, which to me at that time sounded like a lifetime. So we tried for a couple years with no success. Even after we had tried for a few years with no success, Rick, my husband, and I just kind of decided that we didn't really want to go down the route of fertility treatments. You know, we knew it was a ton of money, a ton of time and energy and a strain on marriages. And we really just wanted to keep trying on our own and hope that one day we would be successful. And, you know, one of the obstacles that we faced over the years was my husband's diagnosis of Crohn's disease. He was actually diagnosed with it before we got married because one night he was in so much pain. We rushed him to the hospital and they performed emergency surgery on him. It was so scary. That was a crazy time in my life. I didn't even know it because at the time I thought like, hey, I have God on my side. Like, he'll be fine. We'll get through it. I have nothing to worry about. But now I can look back on that time and see him making him through that experience in and of itself was a miracle. But anyways, for the most part, Rick's symptoms were really manageable and never really caused any major issues other than his energy levels, which when you're trying to make a baby, it does have an effect on things, as you can imagine. So even though on the outside he seemed quote unquote fine, it really was a strain on our journey to having children at times. And for years, I watched my siblings, family members, close friends, acquaintances, all get pregnant and have babies. Beautiful, healthy babies who I love so very much. Truly, every time I would meet one of these babies, I just loved each one of them and absolutely loved being an aunt. But I would be lying if I said that each one didn't sting just a little bit. You know, their life was amazing. It was a beautiful and a miracle in and of itself. But deep down, it was just another reminder that we were struggling. And I didn't have the one thing I wanted most, which was my own child. And I literally remember there were times where I would just cry myself to sleep night after night. Like, why, God? Why? Why do I have to be the only one left out of this? Like, why am I the only person who doesn't get to experience this thing that I am longing for so deeply? I craved that deep, intimate connection with a human that was a part of me, that came for me. You know, I wanted it so badly. I begged, I pleaded, I cried, I screamed. It eventually started, you know, to affect our marriage. And to be quite honest, it affected our sex life. How could it not? You know, it became rigid and boring and super routine and not sexy or fun at all. And after a while, like, that takes a huge toll on a marriage. But even through these hardships, Rick and I were always on the same page. Like, divorce was not an option. No matter how hard it got, it's just not up for discussion. You know, we pushed through one ridiculously hard talk at a time. There were fights, there were rough nights, there were many, many crying sessions, you know, but our drive to never give up on each other is what kept us together and kept us fighting to hopefully get pregnant one day. In the meantime, in early 2021, my sister-in-law was good friends with someone who had 2 nieces and a nephew who needed a place to call home. And I really hope to share in more detail one day with you the story of these children. But for now, I'll keep it simple. And they needed a place to call home and a family to take them in to call theirs and to just love and care for them. And knowing that Rick and I had always had this desire to take in kids that needed a home, his sister called me one night and basically was like, can you take them? And I think we thought about it for maybe 2 minutes and we're like, of course we'll take them. Like, why wouldn't we take them? You know, this is what we've always wanted to do. Since I was a little girl, I've always wanted to take in kids, just like my family did growing up. And that dream became mine and Rick's together when we got married. And now we had gone several years trying to get pregnant with no success. And you're telling me that overnight I can become a mom of 3? Like, yes, no question, you know, we'll take the kids. And so we just had a couple weeks to prepare our home for these 3 amazing children who to this day we are still raising and caring for. They have become a part of us. They have joined our quote unquote unit, as I called it before. Each one of mine and my husband's family members have welcomed them with complete open arms, just as if they were blood. So, of course, as you can imagine, our lives went from no kids to 3 kids literally overnight, and that was insane. I remember sitting on the couch one night going, what the heck did we just do? But it quickly became our new normal, you know? And if I remember correctly, we kind of pushed pause on getting pregnant simply because our life was just more chaotic than ever. And we felt like maybe we should just take a break. And while we love those kids so deeply and so dearly and never treat them like anyone else but our own, you know, as time went on, we just realized like we just still longed for our own baby. You know, it's not because these kids weren't good enough or we didn't love them enough. I just still longed for that deep, intimate, raise you from a baby, teach you everything I know connection with a child that came from me, that was a part of me. So we did start trying again eventually, and again was unsuccessful for a while. But about a year and 2 to 3 months after the kids moved in or so, you know, I remember one week just feeling so freaking tired. Like I would get up from work, I cleaned houses at the time, and just not be able to get my act together. I would come home later on and literally just want to sit down and do absolutely nothing. And so, of course, like I had 1,000 times in the past thought, oh my God, maybe I'm pregnant. But I had thought that so often that I immediately shut it down. And I was like, I really don't feel like being disappointed again, so I'm not even going to go there. But like something inside of me this time just knew. I knew that I felt different. I had never felt exhaustion like this before. And I never get sore like this. So I started, you know, convincing myself that I was pregnant. But again, I was so skeptical because I had been through this so many times. But I caved and I picked up a pregnancy test on my way home from work that day. But I didn't tell Rick. I wanted to wait until the morning because I always heard that early on in the day is the best time to take the pregnancy test. And so on April 8th, a random Friday morning at 5:35 a.m., I went into the bathroom and I took the pregnancy test. And I never watched the stick while it was like loading, like doing its thing. What I used to do was record a video of any digital test that I took on my phone while it was loading so that I could watch the word pregnant pop up. But after so many failed videos, like an enormous amount of failed videos of popping up not pregnant, I was like, whatever. I know it's going to be negative, so I'll just wait. I won't even record it, you know. But again, even though I kept telling myself it's going to be negative, this time, like, my gut just knew. I don't know why I didn't pull out my freaking phone and record it because I just knew that I was. I just didn't want to be disappointed, I think. Sure enough, I looked down 2 minutes later and I saw that plus sign. And I will never forget that moment. And I was trying to be quiet because Rick was on the couch drinking his coffee. The kids were still sleeping. And even though I knew it was going to be positive, I still expected to see negative because that's all I've ever seen for years. And it just hit me all at once. Like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Like me, I'm the one that's pregnant. And I just started weeping with joy and thanking God. And I remember, I literally remember looking up at my bathroom ceiling with tear-filled eyes, just saying, thank you so much, over and over and over again. I quickly took a picture of the stick and I took a picture of me holding the stick in the mirror to capture the moment and like the look on my face and just literal pure joy. And I have like total bedhead. I'm in a sports bra. I have like a ridiculous look on my face, but it's one of my favorite pictures of myself because it's the one photo I have of me in just pure bliss. Like I have never felt joy like I did in that one moment. So unfortunately, I didn't really have any fun way of telling Rick. So I kind of just walked out into the living room and sat the test down next to his coffee and stared at him. And he just looked at me and was like, are you pregnant? And I just shook my head yes. And I sat in his lap and we just hugged. And honestly, we were just in shock and disbelief, I think. Like we were super excited inside, but also having like a, is this real moment? Because we were so used to seeing negative over and over and over again. And I did not have much time to waste in telling people because my morning sickness was so bad. And it wasn't just in the morning. It was all day, every day for 14 weeks. I was nauseous and throwing up. But telling my family and close friends that we were pregnant was literally some of the best and joyful moments of my entire life, because they had all been on this journey with us. You know, they all knew that we were trying to get pregnant for as long as we were, and they were all growing their families knowing that we were aching to grow ours alongside of them the whole time. And so telling our family and friends we were pregnant was a big deal, like a really big deal. And it was an answer to so many people's prayers that were praying for us. And it was like, finally, you know, for some people, including a ton of people in our church who also supported us. And honestly, I could not have had a more beautiful pregnancy. Other than the morning sickness, like I was super healthy. The baby was super healthy. You know, we found out that we were having a girl on my 30th birthday. Like, come on. Is there a better birthday present than that? Let alone a 30th birthday present? You know, 30 is a big year. Like, this time of my life, I was on freaking cloud nine. I remember saying to God, like, this was worth every second of that wait that I've had over the years, like all the hardship of waiting, wondering, crying, pleading, all of the hurt and the pain and not being able to get pregnant, like was all worth it because it was finally my turn. And I felt so unworthy of it all. I felt so unworthy of her, my baby. And I just, you know, I also had the most beautiful baby shower in October that anybody could ever ask for. It literally took my breath away. When I walked into the room, I felt like this cannot be real. I have to be dreaming. This can't be for me. You know, it was a dream come true. I remember every second of that day and every single person who came to celebrate me and my new baby that was coming soon. And it was just absolutely incredible. And, you know, my due date was on December 3rd. That's when I was due. And so when November rolled around, like things were starting to get real, you know. Our home was only a 3-bedroom home. And I had already given up my office for the girls to share it as their bedroom when they moved in, and we literally had nowhere for a baby now. So my husband actually turned our second living area in the house into an extra bedroom, and then we all played musical bedrooms while I was very pregnant, just about a month before her due date, so we could actually have a nursery to bring her home to. And again, it was the nursery of my dreams. It was filled with so many beautiful things and outfits and bows on the wall and a swaddle with her name on it hanging on the chair, and again, like just literally picture perfect. And so the closer we got to her due date, we had a good friend who was an RN, a registered nurse, and I can't even remember her title, but she worked in the field of babies and nursing and labor and delivery and those things. So we hired her to come and teach us all of these things. We had multiple sessions with her, and I took online birthing classes with other people because ever since I can remember, like I was terrified of childbirth. Like, no matter how deep of a desire I ever had to have a baby, I was scared to death of actually delivering one. I don't know why, because I'm pretty tough. But throughout my pregnancy, I was determined to really press into it and learn everything there was to know about laboring and how to deliver pain-free and peacefully. And it quickly became a dream of mine, like lots of other women, you know, to have a medication-free natural birth. And so for many months, I studied and I learned. And so this one friend was just so knowledgeable. She came over one morning for one of her last scheduled visits. And so it was her, it was my husband and my mom and I. My mom was there because she was going to be in the delivery room with me. So I wanted her to hear all the details about positions, breathing techniques, all that stuff. And during this meeting, our friend brought something up about movement of the baby. And I can't even quite remember exactly what the conversation was, but we were talking about like monitoring the baby's movement during labor because I wanted to labor at home for as long as possible. And I remember her giving this example of how you could know that the baby was moving enough during labor. And I remember pausing and thinking to myself, like, that seems like a lot. Like, I don't even know if the baby's moving that much right now on a daily basis. Like, and I'm not even in labor. And I believe I said that out loud actually to her too, because I quickly got like a little nervous about it. Because I had previously noticed that she wasn't like as active as she once was. But I had heard from several people, you know, things like, oh, they just run out of room in there and you're probably just lulling her to sleep when you move around all day like that. Because I was always super active and, oh, I'm sure everything's fine. But, you know, I'll never forget what this friend said to me. And thank God she did. I told her, I don't think I was feeling that much movement. And she said something like, well, it never hurts to call and get looked at just in case. And I was like, why? What could be wrong? Like, I actually said that. And her response was a pause. And she just said, well, we don't even want to go there. And I remember thinking in my head, like, what? You don't want to go where? Like, obviously nothing's wrong. I'm 39. I'm over 39 weeks and we've had no issues. Like, the baby's fine. I will never forget her voice saying to me, just call the doctor. So she left that morning. My mom left. My husband went back downstairs to his office. And I remember we had a very important phone call that afternoon regarding the kids' legal situation. So we could not miss this phone call. I remember I called the doctor's office and told them that I was advised to come in and get checked. And like, if I really thought something was wrong, I would rush there now. But since we have this call and it's really important, like, I'll just come after that. And she told me that I could do whatever I thought was best, but either way to go right to the hospital that I was delivering at to get checked, because in case there's something was wrong, I would already be there. And I remember feeling like that was so annoying, like that I had to go to the hospital rather than the office to get checked out. But obviously I understand why they do that now. And so Rick and I have our phone call and I tell him, like, I'm just going to go get looked at and I'll be home in a little bit. Like, there's no reason to have you come. It'll be fast. It's fine. So I drive to the hospital, and for some reason on the way to the hospital, I started sobbing. Like, even though I was expecting everything was going to be okay, I think something really deep inside me knew that something was wrong, because I could not help but just weep on my way there. I just remember putting worship music on and driving and crying until I pulled into that parking lot. So I finally waddled my way all the way into the labor and delivery wing, and I don't really remember why, but they were having a hard time looking me up in their system, and I had to give them all this info, and I remember just feeling like, why is this taking forever? It felt like a lifetime. It was very frustrating, but finally I was all set. They sit me down in the chair in the hallway to take my vitals, and they were good, and so I was just waiting for the nurse to come in now to do an ultrasound. So, like, even though I was sobbing in the car, I pulled myself together. I was super calm once I got in there. I was not nervous at all. Honestly, I was really just annoyed that I had to be there, because I don't like when my schedule gets interrupted without warning. Little did I know that was the least of my worries. But so the nurse finally comes, and I explain to her the situation casually and get all situated on the table with my shirt up for the ultrasound, and she starts looking at the baby on the screen. And I remember you could hear a heartbeat, but Layla was not moving around at all. Layla's her name, if I didn't mention that. Because at this point, I had seen her on the screen several times, because even though I was super healthy, I did have to have multiple ultrasound appointments leading up to this point, because I was super close to having what's called placenta previa. And basically, they weren't sure if my placenta was going to be in the way of me delivering naturally or not. So I didn't know if I was going to have a C-section. So they had to monitor that really closely, which means even though I had gotten full clearance to deliver naturally, I had to see her on the screen many times, much more than a normal pregnancy. So I knew what she looked like when she was alive and moving. And that's not what I saw in this moment. It literally looked like she was floating. But I continued to hear the heartbeat, so I was just very confused, and it felt like the girl was taking absolutely forever to say anything. So I just waited in silence. And then finally she said, I can't tell if that is yours or the baby's heartbeat. Like, hang on 1 second, let me go get the doctor to look for me. So at this point, I was definitely getting a little nervous, and again, kind of felt like in my gut I knew something was wrong, but I remained super calm and kept telling myself, like, everything's fine. So the doctor comes in and starts doing basically all the same things the nurse was doing, except this time she looked at me with a mask on her face and Layla behind her on the screen, not moving, and said the words that literally changed my life forever. She said, I'm having a hard time finding the baby's heartbeat. And I literally just stared at her. Like, my brain forgot all of the words. I remember staring down at my black fur boots that were crossed at the end of the table, thinking to myself, like, what? Like, is she telling me she's dead? Like, and I immediately had every second of the last 9 months flash through my brain. And after a few seconds of silence, the doctor said, I'm so sorry. Do you need to call someone? And that sentence echoed in the room. Like we were all of a sudden in a small tin can together. And I literally could not form a sentence. I think I said something like, well, wait, I should call my husband, but I have to pee first. It was like my body had known something was wrong and my brain was trying to catch up with it. I have never experienced shock like that in my entire life. I did not know that that feeling existed. And so I slowly stood up from the table. I peed in the stall attached to this room. I just sat there on the toilet and I stared at the wall. No tears, no facial expression, just literally pure shock. And trying to decide now how the heck I was supposed to call Rick and tell him to come here. So I go back into the room and I called Rick, and I really did not want to tell him over the phone. But I also wanted to give him some sort of warning so he wasn't completely blindsided when he got here, because I didn't want him to think it was good news. And so I think I said something like, they're not really saying exactly what's going on, but I think something might be wrong. Again, I knew she had died, but I didn't want to tell him over the phone. So I just wanted him to get there. And the crazy thing is we had this dumpy second car sitting in the driveway at home that sounded like the engine was literally going to fall out. It was undrivable. I had the only working car at the hospital with me, so he tried getting an Uber and it was taking forever, and since he knew it was urgent, he jumped in that ridiculous car and somehow made it to the hospital alive. In the meantime, I also called my mom because she had known I was going to get looked at, and I basically told her, like, you need to come here now. And I will never forget Rick walking into the room with me, the doctor and the nurse, and he took his mask off and basically looked at me and said, like what's going on, you know? To be honest, I don't remember exactly what was said, but I believe that the doctor told him that she was having a hard time finding the baby's heartbeat, and she wanted to know if we wanted her to check again. And Rick said, yeah, check again, you know? So she did the sonogram again for a minute and then simultaneously shook her head and looked at us and said, I'm sorry. And then Rick just collapsed onto the table right next to me. And I have never seen him like that before. You know, I was still in a state of shock, but somehow he passed shock and went like right to just sad isn't even the word, like just devastated, angry, like pissed, like, you know, all the things. He just started yelling like, please no, take me instead, please. Like, and I just remember he tried asking the doctor, like, are we wasting time here? Like, if you take her in now to get the baby out, and could you possibly save her? You know, and of course the answer was no, like she had already passed. And so I'm not going to lie, like most things after that was a blur as far as how everything went, as far as the order of how everything happened. But both of my parents got there pretty quickly, as well as my sister. And I will never forget the look on my mom's face when I was fumbling over my words trying to tell her without actually telling her, because I didn't know how to look at her and say she died. And so it came time to decide how I was going to deliver her, and my immediate reaction was like C-section, like just get her out of me. I want this over with. Like I didn't even want to think about it. But thankfully, because of the wisdom of my husband and my dad, we decided we didn't think it was necessary to go through all of the things that surgery puts you through just so that we can get it over with quickly. And like I had mentioned before, like because of my intense fear of childbirth, I worked so hard at learning everything there was to know about delivering, you know, vaginally and naturally. And I spent so much time while I was pregnant preparing my heart, my mind, my body in order to deliver this baby. And so I decided to not go home, but to stay and be induced to deliver her vaginally. And ultimately, I made that decision as a way of conquering that fear of mine. And even though Layla wasn't alive anymore, I wanted to do it for her. You know, I didn't want all that learning and practicing to go to waste. I wanted to do it together. And I would say that that was one of the hardest, if not the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. But I did it for her. And, you know, so many of the doctors had come in to offer their condolences. And after we kind of came up with the game plan, I'll never forget what my sister said to me right before we walked out of that tiny room. She grabbed my hand and she said, this is going to be hell, but we'll get through it one flame at a time together. And holy crap, if you have somebody like that in your life who is literally willing to walk through hell with you one flame at a time, do not let that person go. I could make a whole podcast literally just on how amazing my sister was through this whole thing. My parents and my family and everybody. But anyways, that phrase that my sister said will stick with me forever. But I won't get into a ton of the details of the laboring birthing process, other than the fact that it was pretty close to perfect. Again, we started the induction the next morning, and I labored with no medication for a long time, just like I wanted, using all the techniques I had learned. And there was really no complications at all. And finally, I believe it was once I hit like 7 centimeters or something like that, my family and I decided it was just time to let my mind, body, and heart rest. Like, I knew that what was coming shortly. I knew I was about to hold my baby daughter, who was no longer alive, in my arms. And that was going to be way harder than labor was. So I decided to get that epidural and just allow myself to rest. And it worked perfectly. And by like 8 p.m. or so, like, it was time to start pushing. And we did one practice push, and both doctors told me it was absolutely perfect. Like, this was one of the most, beautiful yet terribly traumatic spiritual moments of my entire life. And I was just so focused. My husband was on one side of me and my mom was on the other, and my sister had worship music playing in the background for me, and my dad was patiently waiting up by my head, behind me. And I had decided that I really wanted Layla to just be nice and clean and wrapped up before I held her for the first time, because we really didn't know what condition she was going to be in when she came out, because we weren't sure how long she had passed. And so my dad and my sister were going to help do that for me. So that's why they were there. And I really only remember pushing like 3 or 4 times. I'm not sure. Like I said, I was so focused on doing everything that I had learned. I don't remember how many times it was, but I will never forget the exact moment she entered the world. The music, the worship music in the background, the sounds of the fluids hitting the ground, which sounded like a tidal wave, the silence of her and my family. And I just quietly asked, like, is she out? And that silence was deafening. But my sister told me, when she came out, it was almost as if God had given us one moment of her live presence before he scooped her up into his arms to take her with him. And I don't know what the heck happened down there, but I literally had to get stitched up for 45 minutes. It was such a long time. My doctor was incredible when she was done. She got right up in my face with tears in her eyes and said something along the lines of, I'm so sorry. Like, this is so unfair, something like that. But then she said to me, you were literally made to deliver children naturally. And holy crap, that felt like the biggest compliment, but also like sort of a dagger at the same time, and she obviously didn't know what that meant to me. But either way, I appreciated it so much. And, during all of this, my father and my sister were the ones who were cleaning Layla and getting her wrapped up in a swaddle and her hat with her name on it. And, they each got to hold her for a few minutes, and Rick was able to spend his time with her, of course. And then that moment came, the moment I was absolutely dreading, but also the moment I had waited for my entire life, for her to just be placed in my arms. And so my parents brought her over to me. Rick was by my side over my shoulder, and I just remember I just wanted to feel her, like, I didn't want that moment to be about her being dead. I wanted it to be about me holding my first child for the first time. So I just kept my eyes closed for a bit, and I simply just held her and wept. I just cried. And of course, I spent lots of time kissing her and talking to her and rubbing her little feet. And I just remember feeling like so much pressure, like, this is it. This is all the time you get. Like, soak in every single second, and I really did. I mean, no amount of time is ever long enough in that situation. I didn't know how long I had with her. So I just set everything else aside in that moment, and I just soaked her up, every ounce of her. I do wish I would have taken more pictures and videos, although thank God for my sister, once again, for snapping the ones that we do have. I wish I would have gotten a lot more video, but it's like, you're not thinking about that in that moment, at least I wasn't. So eventually, we started to notice that her little head was getting really cold, and we just decided we didn't want that to be what we thought of, pictured or only knew about her. So we decided to let the nurses take her once that started happening. And again, I'll never forget the moment that she was rolled away in the bassinet. It's like they were taking my whole future life away from me. And like I mentioned earlier, other than the obvious, which was Layla dying, everything went so smoothly. I recovered really well. I was sent home that next day and truly, truly had so much to be thankful for through an experience like that. Like, I remember like making a list like of all the things that I did have to be thankful for, even though the worst had happened. So after we were discharged, like that drive home it was so terrible. I mean, my husband and we just cried, and I had this little box in my hand of some memory items the hospital gave to us. Like, they did take a little piece of her hair. They did a little mold of her hand and foot, which was beautiful. But of course, like, it was great to have, but nothing felt like good enough, and getting back home, I walked into the house and I just wept. The kids had hung up all these really cute signs around the house, and my house had been cleaned up by a family member, and it was just riddled with love and food and I believe flowers already. And all at once, my heart never felt so much gratitude, but also so much anger and disbelief and shock and just so much sadness as we were forced back into this new reality of ours. One where our daughter wasn't alive anymore. One where our hearts were completely shattered. And one where our lives were literally flipped upside down in just a matter of a moment. And I didn't realize this then, but what I know now is Layla's life was just the beginning to me, really starting and finding my own identity. And it's because of her that I'm here speaking to you today. And so even though she's not with us on this earth, she is a part of literally everything I do moving forward. And that is how I'm choosing to keep my daughter's memory alive. She is the reason I have found the hope so many of us are searching for. And I desperately pray to God that I can help you find it as well. And so for now, that's where I'm going to stop the story. That was so emotional. Thank you so much, so incredibly much for allowing me to be so open and honest and raw with you. I really dug into some, depths of difficult places there, sharing my story with you. I have a lot more to share, including how all of this affected my husband's health and all the ways, our family is living beyond this deep pain and healing our hearts and our homes. So be sure to stay tuned for my future podcasts. I'd really appreciate it. And thank you all so much. I cannot wait to chat with you again very soon. Signing off for now, your hope dealer, Emmy Smaz.